Well, Daniel, this is really exciting. I wanted to make a quick introduction. I'm Orr Katz. I'm a psychiatrist and director of Feeling Good Institute. Very excited to talk to you today, Daniel Mintie, about your book that's coming out. For those of you who don't know Daniel, Daniel is really an extraordinary person, a very gifted therapist and a master really in TEAM-CBT, and really delighted to speak with you about your new book today, Daniel. So should we just jump in, or is there something that you want to say?
Oh, just thank you for that kind introduction. You and our colleagues at the Feeling Good Institute have been huge in terms of the work that I've been doing in recent years, and feel real fortunate to be part of such a warm and welcoming community. Very much appreciate your taking some time to chat with me today about the book.
Oh, it's such a pleasure for me. So I'm going to jump right in because I'm really intrigued and I want to learn about your new book. I've heard you talk about it in the past couple years, I guess, about when it was in its making, and now it's finally coming out. It's very exciting, and I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about what led you to write this book.
Yeah, would love to. So I think it was maybe 3 years ago, my co-author, Julie Staples, who's the research director at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. And I decided to run a pilot study where we would combine two technologies to address trauma symptoms. The first was CBT, and I covered that end of things. The other was yoga therapy. And in addition to being a researcher, Julie's been a certified yoga teacher for a long time. So in collaboration with colleagues at Harvard, at the University of New Mexico, we created a protocol and ran a pilot study where we delivered an integrative program for patients who had been diagnosed with PTSD. And the program combined cognitive behavioral therapy and yoga therapy. And we wanted to find out if the combination of those technologies was effective, if it helped people. And we were excited when we saw our outcome data that suggested that this might be a nice way into resolving trauma symptoms. So our book, which is a self-help book, essentially presents the protocol that we delivered in the program in a format that people could just read and avail themselves of that protocol themselves.
Oh, I see. Very cool. So it's basically now allows people to take your book off the shelf and help themselves with their challenges after trauma. And you're saying using this kind of combination of CBT and yoga, same as you did in this very successful study. I see.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is exactly actually in the book itself? How is it formatted? What can people expect in it?
So we start out with just a review of the literature and looking at this thing that we call PTSD. It has a long history that goes way back, at least to the Sumerian Third Dynasty, about 3,000 years ago, where folks were describing PTSD symptoms, in that case, in the aftermath of a war in Mesopotamia. And so we take a historical view of this. PTSD itself is a recent category.
A recent name for it.
Pardon?
Kind of a recent name for it.
Exactly. Yeah. in World War I, folks were talking about shell shock, World War II battle fatigue. And it wasn't until maybe the second or third edition of DSM that PTSD entered the lexicon. But this form of suffering goes way back.
Right.
And in our view, the medicine goes way back too, because when we look at yoga, those roots go back to India 4,500 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Things got started there, and CBT seems to be a very old technology as well that might go back just as far. So we present these tools that we've developed, both on the CBT side and on the yoga therapy side, that folks in our program found effective. We have illustrations that show people how to do the yoga itself. We have step-by-step instructions for the CBT tools. We also address insomnia, which is a very common PTSD symptom, and have both CBT and yoga therapy tools that folks found helpful in our program in significantly improving their sleep in a relatively short amount of time.
Oh, very neat. I wonder if there's a new or future direction there with a book for insomnia using CBT and yoga. Maybe we can back up a little bit, and you can talk to me a little bit about what is actually PTSD. What is that phenomena that you're describing from way back when?
You bet. So the short answer would be that PTSD is this always evolving construct. Each time DSM comes out, it's a little bit different. That clinicians and researchers such as ourselves use to conceptualize and be able to study the post-traumatic suffering of a very diverse group of people. Our program has included combat veterans, victims of sexual assault, folks who've been in motor vehicle accidents, sustained life-threatening illnesses.
Uh-huh.
And what the data says is that most of us who are in those situations will emerge from them without having developed PTSD symptoms. But maybe about 1 in 3 will come out with this thing that we call PTSD. And our understanding is that 2 things happen when someone's diagnosed with PTSD. One would be some beliefs about the world change in the aftermath of some traumatic event. Maybe change in the direction of the world is essentially a dangerous place. The other changes that occur are in the body itself. And in the late 1980s, PTSD-related hormonal changes were first measured. And in the 1990s, our scanning technology allowed the observation of PTSD-related structural and functional changes in the brain. So we now know that this construct is quite far-reaching. It affects our beliefs, our thought patterns, our sleep, our bodies, actually it affects immune function as well. So it's a very all-embracing experience for folks who have that diagnosis. And the program that we developed seeks to address each of those different levels in its own way.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's such a great reminder of how common PTSD actually is. If you're saying like 1/3 of people will experience life-threatening situations, might evolve with symptoms, it's actually a lot. Because how many of us have been in motor vehicle accidents? How many of us have been victims to different forms of sexual assault or problems like that? And also you're saying after a medical illness. So fortunately, so many opportunities to have, to develop symptoms and to experience trauma. you started saying a little bit about, well, I guess your book is suggesting a combination of two modalities rarely put together in the past, and which is CBT and yoga. I wonder if you can say a few words about what is CBT.
That's a great question, or probably as many answers to that as there are people giving answers. And maybe I could just give a personal answer to that. I've noticed from as far back as I can remember that I would feel anxiety or feel anger, feel pessimism or hopelessness, or feel worthless as a human being. And when I was a child, I didn't understand what was happening there. I just knew that, well, I was generally a pretty happy kid. There were some tough stretches of road for me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s, I'd say. And I started doing Zen training, which has continued to be a huge part of my life. And with Zen training, I first started noticing the movements of my own mind, mm-hmm. and the correlation between what I was thinking and what I was feeling. And then I started reading in the Buddhist literature, and it was reported that Buddha was saying that too, that fundamentally we are quite well, but we distract ourselves from that prior wellness with our negative thoughts and feelings. So I started to connect some dots, and then when I started studying CBT and looking at what the Greek Stoics were saying, it was exactly the same thing in their own language. So in my life, CBT is this evolving process of understanding who and how I am, and the way in which these technologies, spiritual practice, yoga, cognitive behavioral therapy, can help us understand ourselves in a more thoroughgoing way, and then have more choice about how we're going to feel about ourselves, each other, how we relate to others, to the work that we're doing. And it's probably the most exciting thing that I've ever experienced. Just thrilled that we and our colleagues at the Feeling Good Institute are able to put this technology out into the world. And on a daily basis, I see it just creating miracles in the lives of our patients. Feel so blessed to be able to be in this great chain of human suffering and experience and development that I think probably goes all the way back to the beginning.
Wow, what a beautiful account of your experience with CBT, and makes me makes me think of this word technologies that you use to describe CBT and other forms in yoga. But really, it is a technology, and when I'm used to thinking of technology as like my iPhone and my computer. But really, this is technology, and it's technology was created in order to alleviate suffering, and it dates back so many years. And maybe it's a good place to also give a kind of a shout out to Dr. David Burns, who took these old technologies, these very wise old technologies and then he made them so accessible and kind of developed them further to the technology that we have today with his TEAM-CBT, taking CBT really to new levels, and the effectiveness of treatment with CBT to new levels, which is just, I feel so much gratitude to David for that. And
this book would not have been possible without my relationship with David and with our community. We acknowledge him along with our spiritual teachers and others who have given us the technologies that we're presenting in the book. And I'd agree with you 1,000%. Dr. Burns, is such a gift to each of us, and people all over the world reach out to me because they've read his work and responded to it. It's probably had more impact on suffering in the world than anyone I know.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of chilling and it's very moving to realize. No, so you gave us a little bit of an idea of kind of what is CBT. Can you say a few words maybe about how does CBT help before we go into start talking about yoga? Because I'd like to touch on that too. So how does CBT help in your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I think of emotional anguish, I think it has these components, that there's a belief. We could pick up this belief that I mentioned earlier. The world now is an essentially dangerous place. And if something very bad has happened to us, it might be conceivable that we would, without even noticing it, might be below our level of conscious awareness, change a belief that the world is, many things. Can be dangerous, can be very safe, can be threatening, can be nurturing, can be beautiful, can be horrific. And the belief now would consolidate into, well, basically though, the world is dangerous. And I'm now walking around in the same world that I was in before I was raped or before my combat experience in the Middle East or something. But now, the events around me will trigger that belief and create thoughts. So a common thought that would come up for someone who had experienced sexual assault, say, would be, that man's staring at me. He probably wants to rape me. And then that thought would create feelings of fear, panic, rage, hopelessness, entrapment. And those feelings would then drive behaviors, which could be to make sure I stay away from people, to not go out, to not make eye contact, to not allow anyone to approach me, such that they could actually hurt me. And when I'm acting in those ways, I'm proving to my brain that the world is a dangerous place.
A vicious cycle.
Exactly. Yeah, I just prove my new belief is true. And this is something that is a fascination to me. The universe stands by, ready to confirm any belief that any human being has. The universe is supremely indifferent about that choice. And if we want to believe that the world is essentially a hostile, dangerous place, the universe will say, we will make sure that the data supports that. If conversely, I wanted to believe, the world's actually a pretty good gig most days, the universe will say, yeah, we'll give you that.
I love that. I love that explanation. And maybe enough about CBT for now. I feel kind of that we are not, I feel like we're neglecting another big piece of this book. That's this whole thing about combining CBT and yoga. Can you say a few words maybe about what is yoga? For me personally, I feel a lot more knowledgeable about CBT than about yoga.
You bet. So again, you'd probably get as many answers as you would people that you ask that question. The archaeological evidence connects the origins of yoga to the Indus Valley civilization in present-day India and Pakistan. And this would probably be somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. The word itself is a Sanskrit word that means yoke, Y-O-K-E, as in, joining something or union. Uh-huh. And one way of understanding the word is that it unifies us with the divine life. The goal of yoga as a spiritual practice would be the same as it would with Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism or Zen. It's resolving this apparent disconnection between ourselves and divinity. So yoga aims exactly at that. And while for many people, it would be a spiritual practice, in the West, what we're seeing is that it's now being developed as a therapeutic modality. And yoga therapy, as it's called, is a relatively new phenomena whereby we would look at the way in which doing yoga would affect things like depression or anxiety or PTSD symptoms. And the folks who helped us develop the yoga protocol for our program are working in that area and have a great deal of expertise in using yoga to help resolve things like the hypervigilance, the insomnia, the exaggerated startle response that would be characteristic of PTSD.
Can you say a few words maybe about like how does yoga help? You gave a beautiful explanation about CBT and changing our beliefs can change the way we think and change the way we feel. What about yoga? How does that, what's the mechanism there?
That's the $64 question more that we and our colleagues are asking ourselves. So what we know is that doing an hour of yoga will increase brain GABA, about I think 27% or something, which is on par with what a benzodiazepine would do. So this way of using our bodies to change our emotional experience is starting to be understood now in terms of Western science. Yoga also addresses the changes in the brain structure and function that would accompany a diagnosis of PTSD. So, for instance, a person diagnosed with PTSD is going to have an overactive amygdala and a smaller hippocampus than people who were not. Similarly, structures like the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate the amygdala, is smaller and less active in PTSD. What the research is showing is that yoga will do two things. One, reverse those so that the amygdala is restored to a normal level of activity. The hippocampus would grow back to where it was before the traumatic event. And that as those things happen, what we would be measuring in terms of PTSD symptoms would go down. So that much we know. It does help folks. The mechanisms themselves, I think we're still just guessing about. And when I guess out loud with my colleagues, what we have come to is that probably yoga and CBT have similar mechanisms. That we can't quite tease that out yet, but probably something in the direction of attentional components and self-efficacy would be a part of that picture.
Amazing. So interesting, really. Tell me, Danielle, I kind of am wondering if you can say a few words about who is this book really for? Like who's your audience? Is it only people who kind of struggle with severe PTSD that's diagnosable, et cetera? Or do you have a different audience in mind?
Thanks, Moore. Certainly our primary audience would be people who are suffering from the symptom cluster that we're calling PTSD. Been so rewarding for us to work with these folks over the last years and to see the healing that takes place sometimes very quickly right before our eyes. It's almost magical how that can happen. So we're hoping that this book will end up in the hands of folks who, have survived military combat or sexual assault or life-threatening illnesses or all of those things that might trigger what we call PTSD. We're also hoping that folks who maybe don't have that full diagnosis, maybe they wouldn't qualify for our research, but are still suffering significantly in that dimension, could find the tools in the book helpful. We're also aware that there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion and mystery around PTSD. And so we're hoping that the book might also help family members or providers of medical care to understand a bit more what that suffering is coming from in their loved one or in their patient, and then have a sense of what that person could do to resolve that suffering and move on to live a life of joy and happiness and relational satisfaction. So those would be maybe 3 groups. There might be some others, but if the book helped one human being, I'd be delighted that we wrote it.
That's very generous of you. You yourself are, as I was saying before, a therapist, and quite a masterful one. And I wonder, are you thinking of combining the book with your own work with patients?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Absolutely. I would have actually started to suggest to patients that they pick the book up because, in my experience, there's really nothing magical about therapy. I think what's magical are these technologies. And while I love connecting with my patients, I think oftentimes the technology is what's helping them. And they wouldn't need me in the loop for that. So I'm hoping that folks who I never have ever met would pick up the book and benefit, but it would also provide some structure for a patient that I'm working with in person or in a group setting. And I'm looking forward to using it in that way.
Got it. Do you have any future plans to collaborate more with Julie or offer anything in the future related to this work?
Yeah, actually we do. Our experience in delivering this group protocol has been such a good one for us and for the folks who participated that starting in October, I think it's October 25th, Julie and I will be offering a biannual 3-day intensive retreat here in Taos, New Mexico that will be based on the book's protocol. And we're very much looking forward to, again, offering this technology in person to patients around the world who might want to join us for 3 days of intensive CBT and yoga. The program split 50-50. So we'd be spending, I think, about 3 hours a day working with our beliefs, our thought patterns, our behaviors, and the other 3 hours a day practicing the yoga therapy that we found to be helpful to folks.
Sign me up. I'm excited about that. And I've never been to Taos, but I hear from you and from others that it's an amazing destination. And I imagine there's a lot of healing to be done in that beautiful atmosphere over there. Where could people find your book? How is it going to be available to the public?
So the book's available anywhere books are sold. Any of the online places, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. Our publisher, Inner Tradition, sells the book directly from its website. And if folks were interested in buying the book or hearing a bit more about the program itself, they could visit our program website, which is integrativetraumarecovery.com. and there's a hyphen between each of those words.
Can you repeat that?
Absolutely. integrativetraumarecovery.com.
And a hyphen between integrative trauma and recovery.
Between each of those words. Yeah, we thought, well, we could just have it be one thing, but it just looked very confusing. We didn't know what it said, so we put the hyphens in, so it would make some sense.
Wonderful. Daniel, I could talk to you for hours, and I always find the way that you describe things is just incredibly moving and touching and just beautiful. There's something so beautiful in the way that you express yourself. Look forward to talking more and connecting more with you in the future. Is there something that we should add before we end this interview?
Yeah, absolutely. And that would just be a deep thank you to you, to Dr. Burns, and to all of our colleagues who have created this community that has been so life-giving for me. As I said earlier, the book wouldn't have been possible without all of you. And so you're our co-authors too, though we didn't mention that until now.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I wish you so much success with this book.
Thank you, Mohar. Look forward to talking again soon.